Welcome to what will be kind of a special step on this journey through Proverbs chapter 2 in particular. If you haven't seen last video, this video might not make much sense. It is a place you could start, but the whole idea of doing it came from last video, and how we've sort of set it up for this video is not going to be as systematic as it normally would because we did a lot of the prep work in the last video. So if you find yourself lost, be sure to go back to the last one, watch it, so that you're all caught up on how we've gotten here and why we're talking about this and why we're spending so much time on these verses. And even actually going back a few verses, we had made it past, or at least we thought we did, verses 12 through 15, but we found when we started looking through 16 to 19 that there was this beautiful parallel comparison that was being made, and I wanted to explore that more because it just really captured my attention. So we're going to go ahead and do that today. We wouldn't normally go backwards, but this is just so beautifully connected. Wanted to give it its own time. So let's get into it. You can see I've already set up this chart, some of which we did in the last video as we were looking through these verses, right? Contrasting the evil man and the forbidden woman, recognizing this pattern of speech, forsaking, walking in paths, and then this sort of ultimate end of these roots. And I went ahead and set it in a slightly more organized fashion. You can see the men versus the forbidden woman, and yet we still have that progression of speech to forsaking, to paths, to rejoicing, to a sort of ultimate, well, not rejoicing for both of them, but an ultimate end, which I suppose I could actually label this, right? This is an ultimate end here at the bottom. But what's in green is a sort of commonality between the two. The purple over here is the questions we had begun to ask in the last video, and we'll start to answer in this one. And let's just go ahead and get started. And it does occur to me, and this is on the basis, by the way, of 12 through 19. And it does occur to me just now that there is an interesting difference between the verses right off the bat. Evil men versus the forbidden woman. So why plural men versus singular woman? Well, just by the nature of the contrast that we're making and these parallels that we're finding, this is kind of two sides of the same coin. And so it does actually make a lot of sense that we would be also contrasting the temptations of a plurality versus a singularity. If we think in our lives, especially because this is being written as my son, right? He's talking to a male pronoun you. Why plural men? Well, because particularly in that time, men would be the friends of men. So the plural men seems to be referring to a community, to friendships, perhaps even to work, missions and goals and that sort of orientation, versus a singular woman. And if you're talking to my son, this woman would be a relationship, an intimate one. And particularly in this time, and as it always should be, you can never have more than one intimate relationship with a woman. And if you do, right, that's a problem. This is part of what her being an adulteress is all about. More than one intimate relationship with a woman is an aberration. It's outside of the covenant, just as God doesn't intend for you to have more than one intimate relationship with a false god. He intends for you only to have an intimate marriage relationship with him, so too with a woman. And so these represent two different kinds of temptations, which actually really sets us up nicely to discuss these as this sort of flip side of the coin. The temptations that men represent, the temptations that women represent, the kinds of temptations they offer, and even that fundamental singular versus plural idea that even if it was one man who was tempting you, it's representative of a kind of friendship, a kind of plurality that is communal versus the intimate and singular relationship of one with one woman, a false covenant with one woman. So to sum that up, I suppose we could say, right, that this is the basis of the comparison. Singular versus plural, man versus woman. The most basic distinctions that can be made. And therefore appealing to the most foundational parts of us and who we are. And you can probably see already, I may have to opt for a blank page, which I don't normally do. I normally try and keep it all on one page, but we might have to expand out today since we've already taken up so much space. I just wanted to be sure the verses were available to us as well, which is why they're on the left there. All right, so a question we didn't even intend to answer, but will help us parse this comparison much better. I say that just because as I'm looking at men of perverted speech versus a woman of smooth speech. All right, so we have two options for our first question. Why the difference in speech, but why speech at all? So let's consider why speech at all. That will probably help us. So why is speech that first step? Why is speech that first step? Or why are these men and women defined by their speech? Would be another way to ask that question. And that actually might be the key. Why are these people marked by their speech prior to and over and above their actions? Because perhaps our speech functions as the boundaries of what actions we will take. Our actions are like the manifestation of our speech. Our speech is the first step in making the intangible tangible, and then by setting it into words, it then becomes real in a unique way that makes the action a possibility, and not only a possibility, but a necessity. Right? This is why people stress positive self-talk, so that you're not constantly denigrating yourself, because what you speak into your life will often become true into your life. This is why encouragement in the Bible is so important, that we not gossip and tear one another down, but that we encourage and build up, because speech becomes reality. This is actually the basic tenet of all of creation. So why are they marked by their speech? Because speech becomes reality. Right? Genesis 1. God created the world by speaking it into existence. And so too, as his image bearers, our speech is a creative act, and it has creative power. Not the same kind as his, but an imaged sort of power, right? It's the power of our speech is an image of his speech, which creates the physical reality. It creates matter, but our speech creates a different kind of reality. It creates a spiritual reality that also has the opportunity to become, it doesn't have to become, but has the opportunity to become actuality through our actions in the world. Because again, as we said, right, when we, and particularly as beings with a heart and a mind, we have these ephemeral ideas and these feelings, and a lot of this, is connected into our heart, into our minds. Yet it makes itself known in the world via our speech. And so, what kind of speech we give is the kind of reality that we will begin to craft for ourselves, that we will begin to experience. This is why James talks about the tongue as a fire and as the rudder of a ship, and as this thing that if you can control your tongue, you have mastery essentially over your whole self, because it's that important. In fact, that is a powerful connection that James 3 reminds us that our speech directs the course of our lives and can burn like a fire, or it can direct the ship properly along the right way, along the right path, which is exactly what the issue is here. Perverted and smooth speech are necessarily not true speech. And if speech is the rudder of our life, is the creative reality of our life, then we are all marked by our speech. And our speech will determine what kind of path in life we're going to take. And so if our speech is upright, right, this is an interesting image. Our speech, because of its creative reality, becomes our path in the world. And that can be an upright path, a true path, a just path, right? If our speech is true, just, and upright, that's the sort of path we're going to take, because that which comes out of our hearts, right? From the heart, the mouth speaks. The overflow of the heart comes out of the mouth. Therefore, your speech is the primary sign of where your heart is and where it's going. Therefore, what does it mean to have perverted and smooth speech, and why is it attached to the man and the woman? Right? So if this is us, true, just, upright, and that's what's coming forth from our mouth, and that's the kind of path that we're going to take, and this is the kind of speech that we have to remember comes from God, right? And I'll cheat a little bit here and use both. Actually, that was maybe not a good color choice. I need a slightly better one here. Knowledge and understanding come from God. Wisdom, love, joy, right? The Holy Spirit is indwelling our hearts, and that's where the justice, uprightness, and truth is coming from, because God upholds this path. He makes the path possible. So then what does the path of the perverted men look like? Well, they have the kind of hearts that we have, right? They're dark. They haven't made room. They haven't been filled with wisdom. And so from their hearts, from their minds, a very different sort of speech comes forth. It's still speech, but it's a different kind. It's crooked. And it departs from the way of righteousness. It's dark, as we said. You're never quite sure where it's going, right? It's wrapped in a veil. And you may be partway on it, but you're not going to see what's going to happen next. And behind that veil is all sorts of evils. But you're going to go on that path because your speech is leading you down a path, and the speech is coming from what's in your heart, and your heart is in a particular kind of posture, and that posture is crooked. It's primarily, as we have discussed in a couple other of the videos, it's self-oriented. It desires the destruction of others. And upon this path, you will learn to rejoice in the perverseness. It starts with perverted speech, but then you start to actually walk down this path, and the paths are dark and crooked, and behind those veils are evils which you will then partake of, rejoice in, get drunk on, right? Even though this is a wicked thing. But what does wickedness or crookedness have to do with evil men? Versus the forbidden woman. The crookedness it makes me think of the way men have conversation with men versus the way a man would have a conversation with a woman particularly he's interested in. Right? The way a man would have a conversation with other men, particularly a group of men, is it just popcorns, across the group. It's not particularized. It's just there's back and forth to everyone, but it's also to everyone. It's just general. It's easily confused. It's often funny and jovial. It's enjoyable. It's often and crooked. It's not one topic just moving forward in a meaningful way, or probably often not very meaningful at all. It's just strolling along, having some fun, having a good time, ribbing each other, just walking. And you can just sort of imagine the zigzag of this conversation and how men would be able to lead other men. And again, this could happen with women. I'm trying to parse this difference between a community versus a singular, because I think this could be flipped with women. Very likely, though the actual content of their conversation would look very different. And the way they relate, but there's still this idea of the dispersion of focus and attention in a group, which allows for that sort of crooked, wandering, meandering way. First to the right, then to the left, first to the right. Oh, joke. And there's no depth to it. It's all very shallow. Whereas with the forbidden woman, who is running out of room for this page, so I guess I'll just do another one. This is unprecedented in this series so far, but I guess I'll go ahead and do it. The forbidden woman give her long hair and a dress, I suppose. It's a stick figure. The forbidden woman has smooth speech. Well, why is her speech smooth and not perverted? Because you also have to think about, and see, I should have included this word in here, right? Perverted speech. The kind of sick, weird things that men tend to say to each other, right? The sort of ribbing and joking, the things that they would never say in polite company, or, when they're filtering themselves. It's perverted speech. But a man talking to a woman, especially a woman talking to a man that she's trying to seduce, it's not going to be perverted. It's going to be drawing in that focus. You're going to be dialing. So instead of moving forward and potentially having, all of these tangents, no, we're not doing any of that. Her speech is like dialing in its depth and around you go. Perhaps, but you're always coming closer, always sliding down. That smooth speech, that maybe even seemingly imperceptible spiral of down and down and down and down and down, increasing depth. It's smooth. It's not easily noticed. It's deep. It's focused. And it's like putting on the blinders. That's why it made me think of the way attention is distributed in a group of men versus a man's attention with the woman that he's interested in. His attention is dialing in on her, and she is able to continue to draw that attention in until there's nothing else for him to look at. And then, of course, in this case, it's too late. And that speech has to be smooth. It can't be erratic and all over the place, because then his eyes might divert. Right? He might realize where he is. He might realize where he's going. No, it has to be smooth. He can't feel the descent until it's too late. Until he looks up and he's in a hole and he can't get out, until he's descended into the depths. So did we answer our two questions that we decided to start with? Why are they marked by their speech? We talked about the creative reality. And what's the difference between the men and the women? And why are they related? Okay, I think we answered those two questions, and we're coming up on our time here. So I'll go for the full review, and we'll be able to continue this contrast in the next video. So we began by identifying this initial contrast between men plural and a singular woman, and talking about the different kinds of temptation of relationships, of community versus a singular intimate relationship, and how this is the most basic distinction and the basis of our structure of comparison. Then we asked ourselves, well, what is it about speech in general that this is the starting point of these paths that they're going on? And we realized that speech is what becomes reality. It makes the path an option and, in fact, propels us down it. Because just as God created the world through speech, we as his image bearers, our speech has a creative power. It's a taking from something that is intangible, making it tangible, and then making it able to be acted upon. And that's what James 3 is talking about when we're talking about how the tongue can burn like a fire. If you can control it, you can control your whole body, your whole self. And it's like the rudder of a ship. It's a small thing, but it directs the whole course of events. And that's exactly what's going on in Proverbs here. And we know that in an upright, just, and person of integrity, that from the heart and from God, the speech comes out and becomes this beautiful road maintained and upheld by God. But for those whose hearts are evil, who've turned away from those things, who have forsaken those things, who've cast them off, their way becomes crooked. It's shallow, meandering, and it's covered in darkness. And behind it are evils, which they will be able to rejoice in. And the reason it's crooked is because of that general communal sense of being able to distract you by pulling your attention from one place to another, and you don't notice how little progress you're making, but also the progress that you're making is drawing you somewhere you don't even want to go, right? So you're losing progress towards a better prize, but you're then also being drawn deeper into a place in darkness that you can't see clearly. And as you continue to rejoice in these things, you begin to enjoy doing all this stuff that you know you shouldn't be doing. But the difference between that group of men and a singular woman, the adulteress, the forbidden woman, is that her speech is smooth and it's focused. It's a descent. Her speech descends into the depths, right? That's the end of her path. It sinks to death. And that's the opposite of the men. It's a singular focus that narrows what you're able to see and draws you deeply into it to imperceptibly down without ever realizing that you are in fact being drawn down, deeper, away from the covenant, away from the upright, away from justice. And that's where we ended. We only got through that first comparison of the speech. And there's still so much more here. And you can see these connections into our everyday life of how, yes, you can either be distracted by a million things and miss the main thing to stop making progress, or you can focus in on one thing that you shouldn't be focusing on, and to the exclusion of all else, and therefore be drawn into something which will not fulfill you, which will not give you life, and will only bring you to death and destruction. And what's incredible is that both of those are terrible options. And so the alternative is one path, not towards death, but towards life, that's in light, that you can see, that you is being upheld not by you, not by your friends, but by God himself. The forbidden woman and the evil men, the men of perverted speech, are twists, are taking that which is good, that which our heart longs for, the path we desire to go, and twisting them away from what's good, right? They're preying on our capacity to walk in this good, beautiful, just path, and tricking, deceiving into doing the very opposite of the thing we're trying to do. It's not just a lie. It's fully anti-truth. It's the exact opposite of the truth, right? It's not just a mistake. It's not just bad. It's the opposite of the truth, the opposite of goodness. And that's the coin that we have been considering, and the coin that we must avoid in our own lives that we must avoid at all costs. And what's crazy is that does in fact start with our speech. So consider the words that are coming out of your mouth and that are running through your mind. Consider them always. Take every thought captive. Seek God's wisdom and his help, his aid, his grace to control the rudder that is your tongue, that is your speech, because your speech is powerful, because what you say matters, because you are made in the image of God. And we're going to continue in the next video to parse out the differences between these two women, between the men and the woman, and consider how we can become more aware of what's going on so that we can help others, but so that we can also avoid all of this in our own lives. Because again, as we discussed last time, though these beautiful structural frameworks that Solomon is putting out here in the Proverbs are so compelling and exciting, we can always bring it back to how am I going to see and envision this structure in my own life, right? You can't avoid or go after something until you know it's there, until you can see it. And that's a lot of what we've been doing here is bringing all this stuff to our attention so that we can then recognize it in the world. So if there's ever a video where, I don't have some sort of direct do this kind of application, and there may be many that I don't, you need to consider, well, how does knowing this thing now change how I view my life, how I go about my life, how I pray, how I read my Bible, etc. That's the whole point. This isn't a series about application. This is a series about being transformed by encountering the truth of God. That's happened for me today, as it does every time I come to God's beautiful word. And I hope it's happened for you. And if it didn't today, well, maybe go watch some other videos or look to the next one, because it's going to happen. Because where is that wonderful line? You will understand righteousness and justice and equity and every good path, for wisdom will come into your heart, and the knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. My prayer for all of you today. Thank you for watching. Look forward to the next step in our journey together.